Well, hello and welcome to this is just a response video to a video I watched. So the video I watched was actually from Technology Connections, and I'm going to link it in the description. And it was about how algorithms are changing the way we think, and that algorithms are probably driving a lot of the political polarization we see in society today. And so at first, I'm like, instinctively, that didn't seem right to me. And so I feel like, so when I say it didn't seem right, I feel like this is, and he came up with this term, algorithmic complacency. And, hearing his description made me think, well, no, not really. It's sort of always been this way. People have always sort of wanted this. And his video essay was more about how people just want the internet to give them things rather than to curate their own experience on the internet. And I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think he was looking at it through a very narrow lens. So what I did was, one of the things that I think it was Tom Scott, I think it was Tom Scott who told me this in one of his videos, was, yes, it was Tom Scott. One of the things that he always mentioned in his video is one of the best ways to understand information is to make a timeline. So that's what I did. I made a timeline. And I'm going to go over, and again, I don't think his conclusion is necessarily wrong, but what I feel like is his root cause analysis is wrong. And I wanted to kind of point out why. So we have this nice timeline here, and you're probably wondering, Zerdin, what do all these points on the timeline mean? And we're going to go through that. So this right here is when radio, was like the first, I tried to grab the first public broadcast. I could be wrong, like the dates could be a little off. But this is about when radio happened, 1906. And this line I made is with Courier New. Each one of these dashes represents a year. And I put tick marks in just as kind of like markers so we can kind of see how, to see the proportionality of the timeline here. To help kind of put things in perspective from a visual standpoint, if you're watching this video, like how much of the line was this? Okay, so this is radio, and this was the first, this is TV. And the reason I chose radio or TV is, sure, there was newspaper before radio, and newspaper is a form of mass media, but people have been putting stuff on paper since the invention of the printing press. And while a lot of people talk about how great the printing press was great, don't get me wrong, and the printing press came out in like forever ago. Yeah, like it came out in 1440, okay? And I don't want this to be, oh, here's the last 600 years of human history, and with my projections of the next 15 years to make that, a nice 600. But I didn't want to go all the way back to the printing press because we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. I will say this, one thing about the printing press is a lot of people nowadays are concerned about AI and misinformation. If you look back historically, you had the same thing with the printing press and misinformation for pretty much the same reason. I would say the printing press and AI are both 10x innovations, if not more. And therefore, sure, you can get 10x as much good knowledge, but that also lowered the cost of making bad knowledge, aka misinformation. So a lot of what I see that's happening with AI and misinformation, I think has a lot of parallels to what happened with the printing press and misinformation back then. That's not really the point of this video, but I was kind of pointing out that yes, before radio, there were other forms of mass communication, generally newspapers and stuff like that, and that has about a 600-year history, a little less. But I didn't want to go into all that detail because to me, it's more like radio and television are more relevant nowadays. So there's a few more things on here. This is the internet in 69. We'll just put the I here. And right here, from 47 to 87 is a very important thing. This was when there was the FCC Fairness Doctrine. Let's call it fair. And then this right here, 93 is, we're just going to put ES here for Eternal September. That was really when, like, when more normies started using the internet, because the reality is, before Eternal September, basically the internet was kind of mostly college students. You went to college, you got on the internet, and so what would happen is every September, people would get on the internet for the first time and go to use groups and stuff like that, and there'd be a learning curve for that kind of etiquette, okay? And so when 93 rolled around, they called it Eternal September because I believe AOL gave access to the user groups, and when that happened, basically you always had new people showing up. There wasn't like an orientation like freshmen. Here's the crop of freshmen this year that are all learning about how to use the proper etiquette with our use group. Okay, now it was just a constant thing, hence Eternal September. 96 is when Fox News was established. And 2003 was when the FCC banned the cross ownership of news outlets, which means you could own a newspaper and a TV show. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these, but my overarching thing is, so he talked about algorithmic complacency, and I'm reading this, and sure, he's right, but if you go back through the history of radio and TV, were you curating your radio experience? Were you curating your TV experience? I know I wasn't. I watched what was on TV. And sure, you could kind of curate in the fact that, oh, okay, there's, I have 60 channels. Surely there's something I want to watch on. But how many times have you've been bored, you don't really want to do something, you don't want to leave the house or whatever, and so you just put the TV on and you're like, it's History Channel, it's Ancient Aliens, whatever, I guess, I mean, that happened to me. I used to actually watch the History Channel a lot when it was... Basically, there was I can tell you the evolution of the History Channel. There was an inflection point where, before this inflection point, the History Channel was World War II. Literally every documentary you could ever imagine about World War II. And then there was an inflection point where you got Ancient Aliens and all this other crazy stuff, and that's what's called channel drift. And what that is a network starts airing a certain type of content, they air a new piece of content, and then that new piece of content, people really latch onto it. And as ratings go up with this new piece of content that deviates from the channel's purpose, they start producing more of that content. It was how the Learning Channel went from like learning about operations and surgery and stuff like that to My 300-Pound Life, etc., or 600-pound, or whatever it is, to basically the Learning Channel reality TV. But anyways, part of my point was, for a lot of human history, you basically had radio, which was curated for you. You didn't get to, at best, you could fight to try to call in a song you wanted to listen to. At best. Radio did give you that option because, a song is between 3 and 10 minutes, depending on the artist and stuff like that. Most songs are between 3 and 5 minutes, I think. Obviously, I didn't look this up. We're going off the cuff here. It's really kind of irrelevant. The point is, a TV show is at least a block of 30 minutes, and obviously a song on the radio is a fraction of that 30 minutes. And a TV show, obviously, could be longer than 30 minutes. But I wanted to point out kind of the history of things here. So, radio's been around for over 100 years, right? 120 years. TV is going to be around for 100 years this year. Kind of crazy to think about. And it wasn't until 47 when the FCC implemented the Fairness Doctrine. If you don't know what the Fairness Doctrine is, it basically said if you're going to present an issue You have to present both sides of the issue. And that was basically the law for 40 years. And so, and again, it's like 96 was when Fox News was established. Let me put a FN here. And this is when we're going to call this CO. This is when cross ownership was overturned. It used to be banned that you couldn't have cross ownership because the idea was if you controlled too much of the media, you would control too much of public opinion. Okay, and so like, the internet had like a 25-year adoption to eternal September 24, and the reality is, even if you got in here in eternal September, you were still an early adopter of the internet. I would say probably 2010, you were a mid adopter of the internet. And 2020 is, I think, really when the internet, like, I wouldn't say the internet went quote unquote mainstream, but because of COVID, a lot of people really started using the internet more and more in their day-to-day lives. I would say 2020 was an inflection point. So that's why I think a lot of these things are happening now, is because what happened is you had people that were used to like radio and TV, which is, I put a radio station on, there's 3 or 4, maybe you have 5 different radio stations you listen to, and you flip through until you find a song you want. Now, if the next song plays is quote unquote good enough, you're not going to flip the channel on the radio station. You'll say, oh, okay, this is fine. We're grooving, we're vibing. You're not going to try every song and you're just going to let the radio station play. And it's the same thing with TV, right? Like, sure, you might flip through a couple channels every now and then. I couldn't find the term for it, but there was a term for how networks used to do TV. Basically, they would have their block of shows here. And Thursday night was the big one. Thursday night TV was a really big one, and here's how the blocks were like set up, right? And what happened is, and let's say this is 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it might be 9, and we'll put 10 p.m. here too. And what happened is they put their really popular show. I don't know exactly when it was, because we'll say 9. I'm not exactly sure. It might be 8 or 9. We'll say 8 or 9 p.m. With the idea being that, you're not really looking to watch the 6 or 7 p.m. show. And it obviously be 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, 8:30, etc. But because you were looking forward to the 8 o'clock show, you might turn the channel on at 6 and just watch until the big header show. That's why a lot of old school, and by old school I mean like in the 2000s. I'm not too familiar with television before like the late 90s, early 2000s. Would basically be, I can think of it more with Saturday morning cartoons. I used to watch the X-Men cartoon as a kid. And the X-Men cartoon was the last cartoon that they showed, and the Saturday morning block was like from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. with 11 a.m. being X-Men. So over here is X-Men, and this is the show we all watched. This is X-Men 97. I watched it. Everybody who was anybody watched this show as a kid. And so what would happen is I would watch all these shows in the interim just to get to the X-Men, because I didn't want to miss the X-Men. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the shows in here were good, but one show that I remember that I always felt like was such a slog to watch was the show right before X-Men. It was like it wasn't like a terrible show, but sometimes I was like, I really, really, really just want to see the X-Men. I don't want to see the Tasmanian Devil, or it was like the Tasmanian Devil show or something like that. I'm not saying it's a bad show, but I wanted to see X-Men. But see, you can see that X-Men, and I think they actually had Power Rangers after it, and then Power Rangers, I think, at a point actually eclipsed the X-Men. So that's kind of how they did scheduling. But, this is all curated for you. You're not necessarily even interested in these shows. You're interested in the lead-up show here, but you put it on anyways, because, like, what else are you going to do? Honestly, I remember when I got Outlook on my computer, and I could start scheduling when to watch TV shows, because, like, I couldn't keep track. That was actually a thing I did. But anyways, his argument was, you know, algorithmic complacency is why driving a lot of these things. And I don't really see it that way. We've always, like, there's been a large segment of the population who has always wanted not to curate their own stuff and just flick on the TV, flick on the radio, and just find something to listen. I don't think everybody wants to curate their experience all the time. And I think that's probably because what happens is you get to choice overload, right? That's a problem with streaming services. You have to choose and curate your experience. And a lot of people they won't even watch what they'll do is they're like, okay, let's turn on our streaming service and browse through all the different options. And then, okay, let's do this for a half hour. Okay, that was the show I wanted to watch. That is a legitimate thing that happens. And so it's hard for me to say that everybody wants to curate. I think there's and even I remember, like, I liked picking out the songs I wanted to listen to. But sometimes I didn't want to pick out the music I wanted to listen to, or I didn't want to pick out a TV show every time. And I just wanted to put something on, watch it, and just listen to this radio station, watch this TV show, and not have to constantly curate my experience. So I have a difficulty with algorithmic complacency. I have difficulty with saying it has given risen to the political divisions we see today. I firmly believe that a lot of what we're seeing today is due to media consolidation. So we had the fairness doctrine for about 40 years. That's a pretty big, now granted, this only goes for like 2003. This is a pretty big section of television here. If you look at television as being 100 years old, this is 40% of television's life. We were under this, and again, this is from a U.S. point of view. I know that TV is regulated differently in Europe and other countries, but I'm going to stick with the U.S. because it's where I live. But for 40 years, you had a much more, and I'm not saying the FCC fairness doctrine was perfect or anything like that, but there was at least a concentrated effort by the government to say, you have to present both sides of the issue. Okay? And I do feel like this prevented political division. And I wish I could find the source, but I do remember, I think it was in the 50s, that there was actually a complaint that the political parties were too similar and that they needed to better differentiate themselves to the American people. And that was more with politicians weren't as party loyal. So you had, like, the Democrats had liberal people in the North, and they also had conservative Democrats as well. So there was more of a mix, and the parties weren't they weren't as strict anymore. So you had a lot more mixing with ideas within each individual party. And so there was a lot of difference from back then to now. But I really think, like, people just want to be able to turn something on and watch something. And I don't think that's any different from radio, TV, or YouTube, which YouTube is like way... Whoop. And YouTube... Actually, let me put YouTube where it belongs. YouTube is like way over here. I think it was 2006... is when YouTube started, but it's probably didn't get... Like, I feel like the 2010s is when we saw, like, internet consolidation overall. But, people started watching, they started, they want to go to YouTube and just watch. They don't want to sit there and subscribe and curate. And so, what I really feel like happened is... So, 93 was when you're like... This is the... So... As the internet has been around, more and more of the internet users are what we would call your average person, right? And I feel like as more and more average everyday people join the internet, they want to use the internet like TV and like radio, because that's what they know how to use. And so what you're seeing is a lot more people coming onto the internet that aren't trying to be power users of the internet. People that want to curate everything. I mean, just think about it. How many people do you know just listen to the radio? How many people do you know curated a selection of music for everything they ever do? Like, how many people do you know just turn on, like, Spotify radio versus how many people have a specific Spotify playlist for everything I'm doing? This is my traveling music. This is my workout music. This is my working in the office music. This is my beach music. Versus somebody who's like, Spotify, just play songs. I don't really care, just play songs. And that's one of the big... It's like two different types of people, right? And I think a lot more people, and I remember it myself. I remember just wanting to listen to music that I liked without dictating the music that I liked. And honestly, I did spend a lot of time curating a Pandora playlist. But that was like my own thing. I don't think most people would want to do that. But I really wanted to have a specific type of music, but now that I have it curated how I like, I just let it rip, you know? I don't know. That's just how I see it. So I like, the algorithmic complacency is more like, I want to use the internet like a legacy media provider. I want to use the media like newspaper, radio, and TV. We'll put the newspaper up here. We'll call it News P. And that's what I see. And again, if you want to look specifically at political polarization, it's more about consolidation of media. As media gets more consolidated, you're going to get more views one way or another. And again, clickbait, like, what was clickbait before clickbait? Like, if you don't remember what clickbait before clickbait was, let me tell you, there was this thing. Whoops. Oh, I guess I made the wrong size. Hold on. I really like using paint.net for this. There was this thing. It was a quote unquote publication that looked like this. You might have seen it if you've watched the historical documentary Men in Black. And it would have a really big headline, like, aliens. Proof inside. And can you guess what type of clickbait this was? Ancient clickbait? Did you guess a tabloid? If you guessed a tabloid, that was ancient pre-internet clickbait. So clickbait is not even a new thing. Now, what you're seeing is this erosion between traditional news media turning more clickbaity, and you know why that is? That is fundamentally that there's been this erosion of value for these legacy media organizations. And I'm not talking about, oh, they lie or whatever. I'm talking about, so legacy newspapers, we're making a new one. And if you don't know how legacy newspaper was funded, it was a two-tier funding system. You had subscriptions. So they had subs, just like I have subs on YouTube. But they also had classifieds. And if you don't know how the classifieds worked, and you know, I don't remember how to spell the classifieds. Oh, I think it's, yeah, it was EDS. So I thought it was I wasn't sure if it was called classifieds or something else. It was more I didn't know the right word, but they had the classifieds. this was how your newspaper was funded, okay? So generally, you subscribe to the newspaper for like a year, right? So you subscribe for like a year. You could see there was multiple ones. There was like everyday paper, so like 7 days a week you get the news. Then there were other ones where it was like you only get the news on Sunday, or you get like 3 days a week or whatever. And this is what people would do. Well, let me tell you, when you are subscribed to the paper, paper. When you are subscribed to the newspaper and the newspaper makes money, regardless of the stories it publishes, they are less likely to publish clickbait because you're subscribed to the paper. You're not really interested in clickbait. You're interested in actual news, right? And it's the same thing with, and the classifieds was basically, you wanted to have a yard sale or you wanted to advertise something. Well, that's where you did it as like a person. You could put a little text ad in the paper, and that's the classifieds. Well, if you wonder what happens to the classifieds, there's this thing. It's called Craigslist. And that killed the classifieds, because why would you put it in the classifieds if you could put it on Craigslist? And so they lost this funding here. And then, why would you subscribe to the paper if you can go read it online? And so they lost this here. And so now you have a newspaper with both of its funding legs cut off and trying to survive on the internet. Unfortunately, the way you survive on the internet is through clickbait. And that's why so much of our legacy media is getting more and more clickbaity. Because the reality is, it works. People click on it. It's based off the tabloids, which you've always had, but here's the difference. A tabloid, this is on a grocery store shelf, a convenience store shelf, and the idea was you saw this crazy thing, aliens, they found aliens, I don't believe this, and then you pick it up, you purchase it, and now you've made an impulse purchase of news, which is effectively what clickbait is. Clickbait lowers the barrier of entry even further because you don't have to purchase the news, you just have to click on it. But a click online is effectively selling your attention to advertisers, because of course when you click the tabloid article, you're going to get 5 million different ads if you don't have ad block. And so all of this working together is why we've had like this erosion of news. I'm not going to get into the debate of whether or not the news is trustworthy or not. Obviously, I do feel like there's not as much journalistic integrity as there used to be. But that's not any one thing. I feel like that's more just how the media landscape in general has changed. And I really don't want to get into that debate as much because personally, sure, there's less of a reason to trust legacy outlets from time to time. But me, I generally do trust them. I generally do believe that most reporters are not trying to just output garbage. Most legitimate reporters that work at like the Washington Post or at the New York Times don't want to just churn out garbage. They actually want to do legitimate reporting. Yes, there are obviously times when the media institutions did not do their due diligence and there is slop created. That's really not the point of this video, but my point was more like these are what drove the changes in the media landscape. So again, when you undercut this, and the replacement is... Why did I put classifieds here twice? I meant clickbait. This is supposed to be clickbait. And the replacement is clickbait. You're going to get more ridiculous articles from legacy news medias. And the side effect of clickbait is you are going to undermine the trust in the legacy media. When the New York Times is proposing, oh, here's what would happen if we took over Canada as a 51st state. All right, look. The only way Canada becomes a 51st state is the United States invades Canada, conquers Canada, and subjugates Canada to the United States. There is no diplomatic solution to that. It's the same thing with Greenland. The only way the United States is going to get Greenland is to invade Greenland and take it over by force. Okay? There's no magic diplomatic solution where we work with Denmark and say, Denmark, just let us buy Greenland, and Denmark's like, sure. And then we just, it's a business transaction and everybody's happy. That's not going to happen. Same thing with Canada. So we're talking about an invasion. But those articles you see, oh, here's what's going to happen if Canada becomes a 51st state, from news organizations like, I think it was in the Times. Let me see. Yeah, it was in. It was in the Seattle Times and the Associated Press and the New York Times. Insane that they're even humoring this. ABC News. But the reality is, this is just a new form of clickbait. Instead of aliens proof exists inside, U.S. takes Canada. That's it. It's just tabloid reporting. And it does make our legacy media look worse when we have stuff like this going on. Because now you're like, how can I trust them if they're taking like Canada becoming the 51st state seriously, and then Canada never becomes the 51st state, right? Like I can totally see that eroding people's trust in media, because you're like, this is insanity. Or maybe you're like, oh, it's totally going to happen. I don't, again, we're not debating that. But I'm just trying to point out, oh, this is my old timeline. This is my old timeline, but I wanted to make a better one. So, yeah, you can ignore that. But this is just the evolution of things. And the reality is, with all these changes, like the lack of co-ownership, the fairness doctrine going away, and generally, I would say media consolidation in general, which I guess really didn't happen right back then. But there's been, I think it was from 96 onwards, there was a trend in media consolidation. And there are great benefits for media consolidation for the media companies. Like, they have less overhead and stuff like that. But the FCC came out with a report that said, actually, there's a lot of harm in this. And it's for people that watch the news and stuff like that. If you don't believe me, on Last Week Tonight, and I mean, even if you don't like Last Week Tonight because of John Oliver, that's fine. I would still recommend holding your nose and watching the one on Sinclair Broadcasting, because that gives you insight into this media consolidation that's happening, and it's happening kind of behind the scenes. So if you don't know what Sinclair Broadcasting did, they basically bought a bunch of local news stations. They give out reports, and they say these are mandatory reports you have to air, and they have to air them for the local stations to be in compliance. And this is a great example of media consolidation, because now your local news station is no longer owned by a local interest. It's now owned by a national company, and they are dictating what you see on the news. And that is no different than these algorithms out there. Like, that's the whole thing. That was my crux of my complaint. Like, what's the difference between me being a person who schedules TV shows and an algorithm? You can argue, sure, one is designed by a computer. But both of the goals are the same thing, right? If I do the math by hand or I do the math by the calculator and we get the same result, it doesn't matter, right? Because the goal of scheduling TV shows was engagement. Because engagement meant if I had more viewers, I get more advertising money. Because again, TV is funded by advertising. And it was the same thing with the internet. Clickbait is designed to get engagement. If I write a stupid story about how Walmart and Target are losing to this new retailer who has super low prices, and we all know everybody's concerned about inflation, what's going to happen? Everybody's going to click out, oh, who's this new thing that's coming here? And you know who it is? It's Aldi. They've already been here. It's Aldi. Okay, saved you from looking at that stupid article. It's Aldi. And yes, both of these examples are taken from his video, and I think his thoughts were a little more polished than mine. But I'm just trying to point out that like these underlying forces have always been here. They're just a part of being human. However, what is different is this consolidation of media, and what this consolidation of media does is it allows a lot of alignment instead of different opinions. It means that your local news is going to say whatever that's aligned with other outlets. You're like, and you can see there's a whole thing. There's a whole thing about Sinclair, because you'll see them, blah, 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 this is a great threat to our democracy. And you can see like 20 or 40 to 60 to 80 to 100 different channels saying the exact same thing word to word. That's what I mean when I talk about media consolidation. That's what I mean. That's what's driving this. Because we have less diverse opinions. And as the diversity of opinions goes down, and oh my God, I said the DEI word. Just bear with me, Jesus. Just bear with me. You can have a diversity of opinions. It's not the end of the world. It's not a crazy crime. But as you get rid of that diversity of opinions, you're going to end up with two polarizing opinions, because you're going to have, it's like anything. We have two political parties in America. That means it's either going to be one way or another. If you have 2, 3, 4 companies controlling all the media, you're going to have 4 potential opinions. And sure, you can argue that, well, there's other new media stuff that's like podcasts that are breaking. Sure. And I don't doubt that podcasts are popular and all this stuff. But it's hard to compare podcasts to legacy media in the sense that a podcast with 300 million downloads is an internationally available thing. Like, anybody can download that podcast. Somebody from India can download that. They would give it a download count. I'm sure there's statistics on how much, and it's probably like 150 million in the, I don't know that it's that high, but let's see. It doesn't say. It doesn't say. So I don't know how many people, and I don't know that they would release the granularity of that. Like, how many people in the US listen to Joe Rogan? And I also do think there's a difference, right, between watching a podcast, because a podcast is, basically like a radio show. You download it, you listen to it whenever you want, versus comparing it to like a TV show. Because you have a lot of different avenues where you can listen to a radio show, which like you can't listen to a TV show. But anyways, I didn't really want to get into that, because obviously there's podcasts and stuff like that are outside of the legacy media. And obviously the podcast can be a lot more fragmented, because look at me. I'm a nobody who has an opinion on YouTube, and I have 4,000 subscribers. I am a fragment of a fragment of a fragment of the media landscape. But regardless, you're still going to have a sort of consolidation to big players. And it's sort of like one of the more interesting things to me about the internet, and this is probably the last thing I'm going to talk about because this has gone on longer than I thought it would, is one of the biggest surprises to me is that in the real world we tend to end, like without government intervention, right? We tend to trend to a duopoly. So, for example, in the real world you have Coke, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi. What is Google's Pepsi? There isn't. It's Google is like 90%, and then there's the scraps that everybody else gets. Bing, DuckDuckGo, blah, blah, blah. That to me is one of the more interesting things about the internet, is that it tends to lean towards the natural monopolies. And I don't know if that's whether or not that's due to consumer preferences, or if the moneyed interests on the internet are so powerful that they resolve it that way. I mean, obviously there is what they're doing now with VC funding, which if you're not familiar, a lot of how your new technology is funded through venture capitalists. They come in, they throw a bunch of money at you, they say, hey, we want a board seat, right? Well, on the board seat, they are going to steer you to not be too disruptive because they don't want you to interrupt what they're doing. And maybe that leads you to fail. Who knows where that goes? But this is their way of curtailing competition. And that's not even including mergers and acquisitions and all those things, which happen all the time. But that could be, I don't know if this is the factor or it's actually true consumer preference. Like, we're all using YouTube. We're all using Google. And I will say, we're seeing less of that. Like, Rumble is trying to compete with YouTube, and I think that's a good thing to not have just one platform. Even if I don't really agree with a lot of the opinions on Rumble, it's better that there is a YouTube and a Rumble versus YouTube and a bunch of tiny little sites that don't compete with YouTube. I don't think everybody using the same websites is necessarily the best thing. But anyways, that was just my thoughts on, like, again, I don't think algorithmic complacency is some new thing where people just don't want to do stuff. I think it's just a result of what's happening is a lot of people used to sit around and watch TV. People that just used to sit around and watch TV and had their everything curated to them through TV. And even kids, like again, like, when I was a kid, I wasn't curating my TV shows. I was just watching what was on TV. And I think it's sort of a natural thing. And again, you got to remember, if you were a kid on the internet in like the 2000s, you were more the exception than the rule, right? Like, sure, like you might, like, there were a lot of people that tangentially use TV. Sure. But you were more the exception than the rule. And I think we're forgetting, like, hold on. We were one last thing. This is a bell curve. That's a better looking bell curve. Just pretend, okay? Just use your imagination a little bit, right? And because, and let's say this is the middle, right? Because the internet started out with people going to college and people who were getting an education and all these things, which side of the bell curve do you think went to the internet first? Not to mention the internet is generally a technical thing. It was this side, people over here. This is not to denigrate people who are not as intelligent or anything like that. It's just the early internet, you generally, and again, I'm not saying there could be some people over here that were really interested in the internet. But you have to remember the median IQ is 100. And generally people over here, like, I'm not saying these people can't go to college, can't get an education, can't do that. They absolutely can. But it is much harder for somebody on this side of the line than this side of the line. And of course, IQ is not an absolute thing about intelligence, and there's a lot of bias in it, etc. Use your suspension of disbelief a little bit here. Most people that are going to college are going to be on this side. So this is who your early internet adapter. And then these people have kids, right? Their kids are more likely. And really, maybe intelligence is not the best thing to say. We could probably do the same thing with money, right? These are the people that have money. People that have money were more likely, like when I was growing up, the people that were on the internet first were the people whose parents had money. So let's not intelligence, let's look at money. And these are the people more likely to go to college, because if you got money, it's easier to go to college, right? Everything's easier. So, yeah. Anyways, once again, as always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to say something in the comments. I do always look forward to your questions. And as always, thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.